everyone. This is update of October 10, 2023, day 594 of the war, end of the date update. It's also catch up for October 8 and 9. As always, I'm going to start with general strategic update, and then I'm going to switch to what's going on in Ukraine. I'm going to start with the war between Israel and Palestine, or whatever proper way to say it. Obviously, because it's on the top of the headlines and everything. But I want to make a couple points there. First one is that it seems that Hamas and Hezbollah, they are much better prepared equipment-wise than it used to be. This is no longer just like AK and that's it. At this point, they have anti-tank missiles, and this is what you see here is a Russian Cornet. And what they have is equivalent of it, but it's made in Iran. So basically, Iran received all the drawings, everything from Russia, copied it and produced it, and then they basically that's how they getting to Hamas and Hezbollah and basically Syria as well, like basically everywhere in the Middle East. The problem with just this is that effectively it renders most of the Israeli armor fighting vehicles essentially useless. They becoming actually a liability and not an asset. And you probably even seen how they were essentially abandoned, and some of them were destroyed, some were just actually abandoned again by the retreating Hamas militants. It's because simply they don't need it. They're useless for what's going on there. It's essentially basically actual piece of stone, and and the reason, and just want to explain you why that heavy equipment is essentially, as I said, is liability, is because of these rockets. And obviously, I don't know how many they have them, but they do. It's clear, very clear, they do have, and they don't have them like 10 or 5. They have in some numbers. And essentially, these missiles or rockets, they are capable of destroying all of that Israeli tanks and IFVs. Especially, it looks like Israel military has just also actually military junk in terms of IFVs, those M113s. This is just complete military junk. Ukraine has that as well. It's completely inadequate from all perspectives. And there is not even anything against the hollow charges. Basically, if you look at the war in Ukraine, there is all of this heavy equipment now has there's basically shields against it, and in Israel they still don't realize what they're facing, and so they don't have that. The problem actually, and then actually there's even bigger problem. Because some of the most more advanced Israeli tanks, so like MK4, Makarov MK4, they have this active anti-missile defense system and so on. But the problem is that this specific rockets and system, they actually developed to fight that, so they already can it's overcome. It's not going to be obviously as easy as if you don't have it, but essentially what you have several actually options how to destroy equipment with active anti-missile defense. So first you have tandem hollow charge. So the first one is going to get destroyed. The second one reaches the target. That's one option. There's actually a second option. You can actually launch you can basically synchronize two launchers and launch first one, so it's going to get destroyed, and then the second one, there is basically you can pick the timing perfectly, so the second one will hit before the actually that system activates again on the tank, and so you can destroy it. So basically that's essentially a big problem, and I'm not even talking that fighting in a urban area with tanks is basically is disastrous idea, because they're not made for that, and also you can see that Hamas, they were actively learning what's going on in the war in Ukraine, paying attention. They taking the tactics and tools. So you see that they use these tactical UAVs to drop hollow charges from the top on the tank and destroy them. So basically, they are in some ways more advanced than Israeli army. They actually prepared for the fight, and it's not going to be I think easy from that perspective for Israel. Not to mention that they have also this underground tunnels with basically built using concrete, so it's nearly impossible to truly push them out, and basically tanks are going to be useless, and actually doing this airstrikes creates more rubble and creates actually more, it's better environment for defense. So they actually doing wrong thing. It's similar with what they're creating. They're recreating Stalingrad, and then it's going to be essentially impossible to actually capture it, or you literally need to kill all of those 300 mobilized soldiers there. And that's a problem. That's why you hear calls for some nuclear strikes and so on, which is obviously totally insane. But I think Israeli military also realizing what they really facing, that it's not going to be easy walk, and that's why there is a big problem, and it's very unclear how it's going to get resolved. There is obviously the bigger problem is in all of this is that obviously Hamas is just a tool, and potentially this could be another front line in this big conflict between the West and I don't know what you call it, the another opposing alliance of China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. So this is going to create even more problems in terms of for the West, and more so for the U.S., because essentially U.S. is horsepower in terms of military production and stockpiles and everything, and energy actually production. So effectively, and this could be actually deliberate strategy to basically create many sort of front lines or conflict zones for the U.S. to stretch its ability and basically cause kind of like collapse under the weight of the number of the conflicts and how much needs to be supplied. Because if you really count, it's Ukraine is one, then Israel is going to be number two, then Taiwan is number three, and then South Korea potentially number four. So it's questionable, I would say, that U.S. will be able to pull all four. Just even logistically, it's going to be extremely difficult. So we'll see how it goes, but it doesn't look, doesn't look rosy. Let's put it this way. Then I also want to mention, because it's Russian propaganda is pushing this narrative, is that Ukraine is sort of selling some weapons to Hamas or Hezbollah or whatever. It's obviously absolutely not true. The way, first of all, you can see there all sorts of weapons. Actually, you can see Russian AK-103 there. There's two. You can see Chinese Tai 56-1, which is basically a Chinese version of AK. You can see AKM. So basically, you see like literally from all over the world, mostly actually Iran, China, Russia. That's where the most of the equipment or small arms are coming there. But obviously, there is desire to push, Ukrainian narrative that Ukraine is supplying there, which is, as I said, it's not true. And the way it actually is getting, could be getting intentionally to that conflict zone is because uh, when you have war in Ukraine, the Russian forces pick up tons of equipment because sometimes Ukrainian forces gets destroyed, abandoned, and everything. So there's natural sort of proliferation of the opposing side equipment, and Russia is actively actually collecting. There's a service there that collects, dusts it over, repairs, and stores all of that. So then they can, and this is done, obviously to study them. It's actually also being studied actively, everything, but it's also being done exactly for this kind of provocations where then you can send this equipment and say, well, you see, this is Ukraine is selling this equipment to Hamas or whoever else on this planet. And then you just use, media outlets who can be influenced in the West, and even I see the politicians in the US even picking up this nonsense, literally saying that Ukraine is selling something or whatever. This, hopefully, this explains how these things are really getting to the front line in Gaza, and not to mention that it's tiny amount, which again shows that this is just basically for the show to show that there is something coming from Ukraine, and here's Ukraine is selling it. So hopefully that's explaining this, addressing this sort of problem. Now I'm gonna switch a little bit more to Russia and talk a little bit what's going on there economy wise, or it's not even economy wise, it's just more life wise. So the sanctions, as I said before, technical or technological sanctions actually do work. They are extremely slow, but they do cripple Russia. And unlike the energy sanctions, those actually don't work and counterproductive completely. But there's a good example of how the technological or technical sanctions work is Russian airlines are reducing the number of flights by 10 to 15%. And that's because they cannot service engines on the Airbus and Boeing airplanes. And I mentioned before, about months ago, something plus minus, that there is indication that there are maintenance problems with Russian airplanes because they start to literally land in the fields, in the corn or in a sort of wheat fields and so on. So now this is becoming more sort of the Russian airlines realizing that there is non-trivial danger and the risk of actual crashes and so on. So they basically start to idle part of their fleet, basically cannibalize and kind of continue maintaining the rest of it. So this is just the first iteration. Basically, they lost 10 to 15% of the capacity, and as time goes by, this will obviously worsen. Similar situation, as I mentioned, with the wireless stations for wireless communication, with the servers. But with the servers, it seems that Russia is finding solution in China, or at least trying to. That's sort of where they may sort of get by somehow. Another news from Russia is that they starting to build this internet firewall around Russia, similar to what China has. And for those who don't know, China essentially has a firewall, so you cannot go to any sort of forbidden by the government websites that are hosted outside of China, because inside of China everything is sort of cleaned up and there is no any dissenting voices. Everything is perfect, in quotes, obviously. And then if you want to go outside of China, you're not allowed to many websites. So something similar Russia is preparing to build. So for those who are in Russia, you're not going to be able to probably view YouTube. You're not going to be able to access Telegram, because that's very popular in Russia for those who don't know. Then WhatsApp, and actually, if you think that you can use VPN to I'd say evade all of that, it's, I'd say, in 95% of the cases it's not going to work. It's going to be super hard, and the connection is going to be uh, painfully slow, like a dial-up in like 90s, and you just eventually will just tire out of trying to do those kind of things. So the rollout is expected in some around March 2024. Could be later, or it's frequently delayed and so on. In terms of with the technology that's used is basically deep pocket inspection. And that's why it's going to be very slow, because it's essentially all traffic is going to be I would say overwhelming majority of the traffic going outside and outside of Russia and coming into Russia is going to be inspected. So literally pretty much everything is going to be inspected and stopped, whatever is sort of not allowed. And so this is pretty much a total control, or I'd say very close to total. You're not going to be never going to be able to do sort of 100% perfect control, but it's just sufficient enough to maintain the control over society. There is another effort that's being done by Russian government, and it's called single biometric system, where uh, every Russian citizen is giving their biometric data in a single database where everything's centralized, which is a complete terrible idea, because that's a perfect way to steal it and then abuse it and do a lot of harm. But they obviously don't think about that. And for now, it's voluntarily for Russia, and there's no excitement among the population there, but eventually they probably will do some kind of in a forceful way. There is another third sort of pillar of all of this is there is basically Russian government make placed order with, I think, one of the universities to develop a social credit system. Basically, the same what's going on in China. If you don't know, just Google what's social credit system. But it's basically a system of control over society by the government. Um, so this is, for those who were thinking that Russia is, uh, you know, um, you know, opposing West and proposing sort of freer, better society and so on. It's a completely false narrative that just, I would say, being falsely pushed in the West to have higher moral ground, because Russia completely understands that whoever has higher moral ground eventually wins the war, and so they kind of trying to create this false moral superiority, which is absolutely not what's going on there. Then the last topic is Russian energy situation internally. If you remember, I was discussing the shortages of gasoline and diesel fuel inside of Russia. Then finally, Russian government started a renewed system of subsidies. The same time, it doesn't, as I said at that time, it remains to be seen if it's actually going to be working. And there are first signs that it's probably not working, because Russian anti-monopoly agency started actively attacking local refineries and businesses that distribute, like, do wholesale distribution of gasoline and diesel fuel in Russia for made up allegations of anti-monopoly practices. basically in a primitive way, just price gouging. This is how it's usually fed as to the society, by the government to sort of point the finger and find the scapegoat. And obviously, the actual culprit is actually Russian government. But they're not going to say that. They obviously blame the local businesses for everything. But again, this is a sign that things are not working well, meaning that Russian government simply doesn't want to pay those subsidies, and then they're still trying to figure out how to force business to actually eat up those expenses. And obviously, you cannot do it. You're gonna have shortages. So again, the problem is not solved. It's sort of kind of like in semi-solved or semi-problematic situation. We'll see how it all develops over time. Now let's actually switch to the situation on the front line. And I'm going to do a walkthrough in a clockwise fashion, as I always do. But as a general update, Russian forces are continuing their strong push. This is what I mentioned for the couple previous videos, that it seems that Russian command is willing to basically push Ukrainian forces and try to win initiative, or at least have some local victories, and basically prove that Ukrainian so-called offensive, because as I said many times before, it's not truly offensive. It's I would say disaster. But whatever it was, basically to prove it that it's complete failure. That's a whole. So basically, the whole point of all of this attacks is to show that Russian forces will be able to recapture, if not everything, whatever they lost, but majority of it, and maybe even gain some more. So essentially, show that the whole effort and all of the resources that were honestly wasted over the summer are truly wasted, and I just want to show it as propaganda, for propaganda purposes, essentially. And once we get to the sort of relevant section of the front line, I'll discuss it there. But let's first start with the situation along the state border. Remains the same, nothing out of ordinary there. Now let's jump to the North Lugansk front line. Things here are also similar. As I said, Russian troops are more active. Tactical attacks here around Avdiivka. They continue these attacks. There's no real progress, but they continue pushing there. Now let's move to the North Donbass front line. Northern sector is still sort of sleepy and quiet. Nothing major is happening there. But the southern section is active, and there is purely tactical attacks, counterattacks. I probably can say that Ukrainian attacks, and then Russian counterattacks with the goal, obviously, of recapturing lost ground. But so far, essentially, it's a status quo here. Now let's move to the central Donbass front line, and this is where the things are actually getting somewhat problematic for Ukrainian forces. And this is where actually the sort of focus and goal of this large coordinated effort by Russian command, where they put pressure everywhere. But the goal is actually to capture Avdiivka. I mentioned this before, that it's sort of hanging by hair, and it's in dangerous situation for Ukraine, because the bottleneck that connects Avdiivka to the rest of Ukraine is becoming sort of narrower and narrower, thinner, and that's creating a problem. That's ability to resupply troops and so on. And so on the morning of the 10th, Russian forces actually did, I would say, somewhat proper actually attack, local tactical offensive, where they used first artillery, they used aviation, and basically by aviation I mean gliding bombs, and so there was a proper sort of, I'd say, attack, artillery and air attack on Ukrainian defensive positions, and there was significant damage done. And then Russian troops went into attack in large numbers, in large concentrated groups. It probably was, I would say, up to 1,000 soldiers and probably somewhat more than 50 AFVs. So it was pretty significant, could be even more than 50 AFVs. It was a very significant attack, especially given that it's sort of on the small concentrated section of the front line. And it was properly sort of structured and done. So there was attack from the basically northern pincer and southern pincer. Southern pincer completely failed from the beginning. Russian troops didn't get far. The northern Russian troops actually managed to breach to some extent Ukrainian defensive positions. Not completely, didn't get into the sort of operating area. Basically, did not penetrate fully Ukrainian defensive positions. I make sure to show. This is actually from. As you can see from March 24, and essentially the situation is somewhat similar. And this time, they actually Russian troops, what they did, they actually didn't attack Stepove, this village here. They actually decided to attack north of it, so they don't need to fight in the village, which is actually intelligent approach. And based information I have, they managed to reach the railroad and cross the railroad, but then they were stopped essentially slightly after the railroad, and the fighting continues. So we'll see what happens in the coming sort of days or day. As I said, the push was very strong. Russian troops lost a lot of equipment, people. Ukrainian troops suffered heavy losses. So both sides are sort of suffered heavy losses. But it's sort of normal for how in sort of in quotes, it's nothing is normal in this way, but for the how the operation is done, this is sort of what is expected. Where you have initially very heavy losses, and on both sides, the question is, will Russian troops manage to actually fully bridge Ukrainian defensive positions and start to really strengthening and basically moving towards this village Berdichi and then even more south. So that's a big question. It's sort of like, as I speak, probably this fate of all of this is being decided there. The only sort of positive is that southern attack completely failed, didn't go far, because otherwise we would have a pretty critical condition at the moment. It's difficult, but it's not critical. I would describe it this way. So this is the reason. The whole point of all of this for Russia is to show that they're still able to capture large towns, which Avdiivka is. It's actually larger than Bahmut, and I would say, if economically, used to be much more important than Bahmut. Actually, it was actually a pretty important town. And so basically to show that Ukraine is not only not able to do successful offensive, they actually even losing and losing ground in significant way. And obviously that the idea is that will influence position in the U.S. Parliament, where there is conversation going on right now about giving financial aid to Ukraine. And as everybody aware, there are a lot of problems. There's a lot of pushback for, I would say, a lot of legitimate reasons. And so that's a whole point from a Russian perspective, what they're trying to achieve. One thing I want to say is this is the first time that I'm seeing that actually Russian command is trying to do proper way, sort of this small scale offensive where it's at least there is attempt. It's not working sort of perfectly, but at least um, there is sort of generally it's there is proper idea, and with practice it's going to get better. This is as I said, first time that where it's done somewhat sort of directionally right, let's put this way, which is I haven't seen that from Ukrainian side so far. So in other words, the point here is that it looks like Russian command is starting to be a little bit one step ahead of Ukrainian command in its skills, which is unfortunate. Now let's move to Zaporizhya front line. Things here are more or less the same, nothing truly special, just purely small scale tactical squeezes, just sort of all of that sort of improper way of doing sort of war. And that's being sort of done by Russian side here, as you can see, and then Ukrainian side. Ukrainian troops continuing to attempts to liberate this Novoprokopivka village. Russian side is attempting to hit in the flank, and so this is this, and basically status quo remains at the same time. And the same here, no success for the Russian troops near Oruzhaine, where they try to basically counterattack. Uh, Now let's look at the last section of the front line along Dnipro River. Things here are quiet. This is probably the only section of the front line where things are sort of as usual, quiet, and no changes here. That's all for today. Thanks for watching, and until next time, bye bye.